I was having y'all boy Rico from RicoScores, and man, I can't wait for us to go ahead and get this head coaching thing situated so we can go ahead and move on to coordinators, and then we can go ahead and start focusing on free agency, draft, all of that type of stuff. But when new information comes out, I gotta talk about it. I gotta report it because I'm pretty sure there are a few y'all at the very least out there that only solely rely on me for information. So I'm like, let me make sure I report every little thing. So even though I talked about a few things last night live during the game, and I was like, let me go ahead and knock that video out, even though it was during the Lions and 49ers game. Yeah, I could have waited till afterwards, but I was hungry. Already knew the itis was gonna hit and video probably wasn't gonna happen. So I was like, let me go ahead and knock this video out now, and then maybe tomorrow some new information will come out. And that has happened. Between last night to leading up to this afternoon / evening, it's been reported that the Washington Commanders could have a head coach as soon as Tuesday. I'm coming to you with the full Washington Commanders head coach interview schedule. When exactly we're interviewing everybody and the list of exact candidates that we've already interviewed and all of that type of stuff. And all of these interviews we're talking about are in-person interviews. These are the guys that made it to the second step. So the Washington Commanders search is now down to 7 candidates, as reported by Tom Pelissero, with him giving the full schedule when we're interviewing everybody. It's really more like an obvious top 4 candidates type of situation. We're going to talk about that. Also, all interviews will be done before Wednesday, which is really interesting, which is why we could have a head coach as soon as Tuesday. And the Seahawks are also down to 2 head coaching candidates, which affects our head coaching search as well, because they may take one of the top guys and we may end up with one of the other top guys. It's going to get really interesting. Remember, there's only 2 open head coaching vacancies right now, so all of the top candidates are fighting for the same 2 jobs. Right now, it's the head coach musical chairs, and we're almost done. The Commanders and the Seahawks could both hire their head coaches before the end of this week. And of course, Adam Schefter is completely contradicting all other reporting right now. We got to talk about that as well. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure y'all stay tuned, because again, I'm giving y'all all of the information that's coming out as far as the head coaching search and all of these other things, but y'all know what I'm really here for. My main passion is getting to this free agency and, most importantly, this draft content. So y'all know I can't wait to get back to another mock draft, especially after we hire our next head coach. Expect a mock draft immediately after that that's going to be centered around how they prefer to build teams and build their offense or defense, depending on if we go offensive-minded head coach or defensive-minded head coach, whatever. Stay tuned for that. Film sessions for draft prospects that are going to be exclusive to channel members only. All of that type of stuff, man. Make sure y'all stay tuned. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's get it. All right, so Tom Pelissero has reported that all of the Commanders' remaining head coach interviews could be completely wrapped up within the next 48 hours. And we could expect the head coach announced very soon, potentially. Who knows if the Commanders are going to draw it out to do like extreme due diligence. But there is a chance, not saying it's very likely, but there is a chance that we could announce a head coach hiring for the Commanders by Tuesday night. That's very real. So let's talk about the schedule. We have Ravens defensive line and assistant head coach Anthony Weaver. He's interviewing Monday, as in today afternoon. That interview's probably already happened. Then the Commanders are interviewing Ravens defensive coordinator Mike McDonald on Monday night tonight, and then Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn Tuesday morning, tomorrow morning, and then lastly Lions defensive coordinator Ben Johnson and defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn later in the day Tuesday. Now, Tom Pelissero didn't exactly point out and differentiate when we'll be interviewing Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson specifically when it comes to those last 2 guys. We have, again, Anthony Weaver today, already happened this afternoon, and then Ravens defensive coordinator Mike McDonald tonight, then Dan Quinn tomorrow morning, and then sometime after that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, but we don't know the exact order, even though I'm assuming that Ben Johnson would probably be last. I also want to point out the fact that the Commanders have also already interviewed Bobby Slowick and Eric Bieniemy in person, and that's about it for every head coach that has basically made it to the second step, that has made it to a second overall interview, but their first in-person interview. And maybe first and last for a lot of these guys, and maybe everybody. Maybe after interviewing Ben Johnson in person, that's it. We're done. We don't even need to do like a third round of interviews. We'll see. But I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Glenn and Anthony Weaver are pretty much just Rooney Rule interviews, because we still have to interview 2 minority coaches in person. Virtual does not count. And I also don't believe Eric Bieniemy counts, since he's still currently employed by the team, even though we did interview him in person. Because just to let you know, if we end up hiring, say, for example, Ben Johnson as our offensive-minded head coach, and he brings over the Lions offensive lines coach as his offensive coordinator, that means we technically have to fire Eric Bieniemy to make him our offensive coordinator. He's not just this free agent guy out there. So I'm not sure. I highly doubt Eric Bieniemy counts towards the Rooney Rule, and I'm pretty sure they're doing their due diligence and feel like Anthony Weaver and guys like Raheem Morris and Aaron Glenn are great candidates. But I'm pretty sure they're also trying to check off the checklist. We've done our Rooney Rule. We're done. We're good to go, and we're ready to go ahead and hire our favorite candidate, who's potentially a Ben Johnson. And to remind you, the 2 Lions coordinators are the only interviews that the Commanders are flying to. The Commanders are going to Detroit to interview those guys in person. And I'm quite sure that it is for Ben Johnson more than it is for Aaron Glenn or anybody else. So I'm pretty sure they also prioritize Aaron Glenn. I'm pretty sure he's a pretty good candidate that the Commanders are actually considering for real, but I think they're flying to Detroit for Ben Johnson. I'm just thoroughly convinced of that. I also think that it is very noteworthy that they are saving Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, that combination, that pair, for the very last. Again, I think Ben Johnson is going to be the last, even after Aaron Glenn, but I'm pretty sure that we're saving arguably the best for last, or most likely for last, in Ben Johnson. It's kind of like a let's hear everybody out just in case, but we're going to let Ben Johnson get the very last interview to make sure he is the guy who we think he is. We're going to hear everybody else out, but we're going to save the guy we want the most for last, and then that interview could turn into contract negotiations and could turn into an official hire, versus it would be a little bit weirder we interview Ben Johnson early or in the middle, and then we talk to these other people afterwards, and then we got to double back to Ben Johnson to hire him. So I'm pretty sure they set that up that way on purpose. And if you're into high school recruiting as much as I am for like college teams and things like that, you know that you either want to be the first visit or the last visit. First visit is only good if that high schooler decides to commit immediately and doesn't even take those other visits that he had scheduled with the other schools originally, just cancels them because he's like, yeah, that first visit was all I needed. I'm good to go right where I'm at right now. But if you're that first school and that kid leaves still wanting to take visits, that last school is in the best position. That last word is heavy, man. That last offer. So I think there's some parallels there, and even though it's not the exact same situation for college recruiting and with the Commanders trying to technically recruit Ben Johnson as their head coach. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but I think it's very likely that Ben Johnson could be hired as a head coach before even the end of the week. I really do believe that. And Adam Schefter, of course, has reported that Josh Harris and Adam Peters could possibly run a third round of interviews with the select few finalists. Again, we have 7 guys that are technically the last 7 with the guys that we're interviewing in person. Nobody else is being interviewed in person. We only have 7 guys interviewed in person, already done or potentially going to be done. Again, already done, Bobby Slowick and Eric Bieniemy, and then going to be done, you have Anthony Weaver, Dan Quinn, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, and Mike McDonald. Those are literally the only 7 guys that are even being relatively considered at this point. We virtually interviewed more than that, I believe, but those are the 7 that they're focused on that have made it to the second step. And then there's potentially a chance that we can narrow it down from 7 to a select few, maybe like 2, because we had the GM candidate interviews and we interviewed like 7-8 people, or at least requested to interview a lot of them. And then after we had the first set of interviews, we brought Adam Peters and Ian Cunningham back to be like the final selection right there. So maybe we have like a third round of interviews with the final 2 finalist situation, and we'll see who that is if that happens. Or maybe we just finish up Tuesday night interviewing Ben Johnson and like, yeah, that's our guy, no need to even interview anybody else, we're done here. And so again, I want to re-emphasize that they are flying to Detroit to interview Ben Johnson in person, and you're not doing that for anybody else. Ben Johnson is already in the DMV area because he's still currently employed by the Commanders. Bobby Slowick went to the DMV for his interview. Dan Quinn Mike McDonald, Anthony Weaver, all of those guys are also going to the DMV for their interviews. And then you have the Commanders going to Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn in Detroit to interview those guys. They're not flying to Baltimore. They're not flying to Dallas. They're not flying anywhere else, only to Detroit. So there's clear interest from the Commanders in. And why would you want to waste all of that money and time to go to Detroit to not close the deal, in my personal opinion? I feel like if you really planned on having a third round of interviews, you could have had every single candidate come to you, including those 2 Detroit Lions candidates. And I feel like the Commanders going to Detroit is actually a really big deal, in my honest opinion. And I didn't root against Ben Johnson in that game against the 49ers. I was hoping they would go crazy. I felt like the ideal scenario was for them to score a lot of points and lose. But ideally, I was actually just rooting for them to go ahead and win, because it would be nice for our future head coach to be a Super Bowl winner. But I am happy that now, since he's not in the Super Bowl, we can go ahead and wrap this whole thing up, because we were already going to interview him either way, no matter what, on Tuesday night, even if the Lions won, lost, headed to the Super Bowl, whatever. But we wouldn't be able to talk contracts, wouldn't be able to talk numbers, or just straight up hire him unless he lost against the 49ers. And I am happy now, looking back, that we can just go ahead and knock this out if we want to. If they so choose to do so, we can. We legally can go ahead and hire him, because this 2023 season with the Lions is officially over. They could hire him on the spot on Tuesday if they really, really want to. And if he would have beat the 49ers and would have been headed to the Super Bowl, they wouldn't have been able to do that. Also, don't forget, there are only 2 head coach vacancies remaining out of the original 8, the Commanders and the Seahawks. On the Seahawks side, they're reportedly planning on interviewing Ben Johnson Monday, as in today, and Mike McDonald as in Tuesday. So they're saving Mike McDonald for last. We're saving Ben Johnson for last. I think there's some parallels there. I think that's interesting and very noteworthy. And I think that it's very noteworthy that there's no Dan Quinn there for the Seahawks. Maybe they already did their Dan Quinn second interview. Maybe I just missed it. Or maybe they're just no longer interested in him. He's no longer in the running. And that's for the Seahawks. It could be down to Mike McDonald and Ben Johnson on the Seahawks side. And you really can't miss either way for them, honestly. Those are 2 of the top 3 candidates. So if I had to guess right now, I'd predict the Seahawks to hire McDonald and for the Commanders to hire Ben Johnson, which also means that Dan Quinn stays in Dallas as a defensive coordinator and Ron Rivera does not become Dallas's next defensive coordinator. It's really interesting how there's like a huge domino effect based on who the Seahawks and the Commanders end up hiring as head coaches, where everybody else falls in line after that, because then now Detroit has to go find a new offensive coordinator and all of that type of stuff, and maybe even positional coaches, because I wouldn't be surprised if Ben Johnson brings as many Detroit Lions coaches with him if we hire him as a head coach. Again, it's already been reported from multiple sources behind the scenes that Ben Johnson would prioritize bringing his Detroit Lions offensive lines coach as the offensive coordinator wherever he gets a job, if it's with the Commanders or whatever, as a head coach. And I've already done a full video breaking that down, why that's such a great idea. But he would also probably want to bring ex-Redskin Mark Brunell as the QB's coach, ex-Redskin Antoine Randall as the wide receivers coach, and maybe many others. Go ahead and bring the tight end coach as well, because they did a great job of not only scouting and developing Sam Laporta, but also finding a way to utilize him in the offense and to make him a deadly threat on a consistent basis. So bring over as many Detroit, whatever helped you succeed the way that you just succeeded for the Detroit Lions in this 2023 season. Bring as many people as it takes. If you just have a personal water boy you like the most, bring him with you too. I want whatever contributes to what the Lions did this season over on the burgundy and gold, the Commander side of things. But I also want to emphasize that, yeah, there were originally 8 head coaching vacancies out there. There are only 2 remaining. There's a reason that those other 6 teams went ahead and hired their guy. So again, like I've explained in a previous video, I think we're waiting this long to hire Ben Johnson because the guys we've already interviewed is not the guy. I think it's just due diligence. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to go ahead and hire, if Bobby Slowick was your favorite candidate, we've already interviewed him in person. You wouldn't even wait until you interview Mike McDonald, Anthony Weaver, and Dan Quinn and all of those guys, unless there's like a Rooney Rule situation that you haven't completed just yet. But if Bobby Slowick was your guy, Bobby Slowick would already be our head coach. So there's clear interest in, and there's a clear, it's deliberate that they're waiting until they get that Ben Johnson interview to announce their head coach. There's a reason they're saving him for last. And of course, we have to address this Adam Schefter situation with him directly reporting against all other reporting that we're hearing from everywhere else, everybody else. Everybody else is saying that it's literally assumed Ben Johnson is our head coach. You have some other people saying that Ben Johnson to the Commanders is a lock. I mean, you have all of this reporting. Then you have Adam Schefter completely on the other side in the middle of the crowd swinging by himself, completely contradicting everybody else's reports. And basically, I mean, this is a great point. When Adam Schefter speaks, we all listen. Nobody is plugged into the NFL like Adam Schefter. Everyone believes Ben Johnson is going to Washington, Dan Quinn to Seattle. Today, Schefter said, and it's a long video clip with him on the Pat McAfee show and things like that. He said a lot of interesting things, but the main thing is that he said, quote, "I will bet you at minimum one of those is not right, maybe both," unquote. And I think he is probably right about the fact that one of those is not right. I think Ben Johnson to the Commanders is going to happen. But like I said in the previous video, I'm telling you that it's looking like Dan Quinn will not be the Seattle Seahawks head coach. I think it's more of a Mike Macdonald to the Seahawks and Ben Johnson to the Commanders. And I also want to point out, like I said in a previous video as well, I strongly feel like this is the Commanders telling Adam Schefter to say those things. Like, hey man, I know we really want Ben Johnson, but we can't make it look like that, man. We gotta at least make it look like there's some relative interest and due diligence going on amongst other head coaching candidates. We can't act like we're just straight blinders on to beeline into Ben Johnson. So I really feel like it's more so the Commanders just telling Adam Schefter, hey, put this information out there. We're still considering everybody. It may be a leverage game against Ben Johnson so that Ben Johnson doesn't know that the Commanders only really want him, and then he utilizes that leverage and contract negotiations to get more money out of the Commanders. Who knows? It could be a lot of different things, but again, either way, I feel like it's the Commanders telling them that. Shouts out to my boys at the Tan Top Podcast. Follow them on Twitter, YouTube, everything. I bring them up all of the time because they always have great quotes and information and ideas, and they have a great tweet right here. I could be wrong, but I get the sense that Schefter is doing the work on behalf of the team to paint the narrative that the Washington Commanders head coaching job is still not decided, to counteract the strong public expectation for Johnson, which would make the interview process look like a sham. That's really interesting. So I also feel like instead of worrying about us hiring the wrong head coach potentially with all of this Adam Schefter news, I feel like we should be more so focused and more so excited about how this new era of Washington is doing things the right way and making sure that they conduct a fully thorough interview process. I feel like that's where more of our energy needs to be towards. Not, oh, the Commanders are about to mess this up and they're about to potentially hire Dan Quinn. No, I highly doubt that. I think this is more so just, hey, look, we're doing things the right way. We're giving every single person a chance, and that's very refreshing from what we've dealt with my entire lifetime. Because again, I wasn't alive to see any of the Super Bowls. All I've known is Dan Snyder my entire life. So this is really nice to see that we're actually doing something thoroughly and with great detail and actual consideration of a lot of different candidates for different things. So I'm super excited, man. I think if anything, this is great news what Adam Schefter is putting out there. Shows the Commanders are not trying to show their hand, and I hope we continue that trend when it comes to the draft process, free agency, and things like that. I hope we have no idea, and no other team has any idea what the Commanders plan on doing when it comes to talent evaluation and talent acquisition. I hope we continue that same thing, not only with coaches, but with players as well. Now, like I've been saying for a few days now, again, it's going to be Mike Macdonald to the Ravens and Ben Johnson to the Commanders. That perfectly aligns with what Adam Schefter is saying. Basically, he would bet money that this whole Dan Quinn to Seahawks and Ben Johnson to the Commanders, at least one of those things is wrong. And that's my prediction, like I've been saying for a few days, even before he said that. I mean, because even just look at it from the Seahawks end. To hire Dan Quinn, shouts out to Bandstand Dig for pointing this out, worded it perfectly. This is exactly what I was thinking. To hire Dan Quinn after making him wait a week plus starts that era pretty awkwardly. Not interviewing McDonald at all in the initial windows and then hiring him would be odd. These actions would take the notion of leverage to the extreme. Odd process over there. So either way, it's weird. But again, like I've basically stated, even on our end, if we had already interviewed the guy, they would already be hired. We wouldn't still be out here interviewing people, just like the other 6 of the 8 head coaching vacancies have already made their decision and didn't even wait for a chance to interview Ben Johnson in person, even though he was one of their top candidates, or maybe they just felt like he was out of reach or whatever, but they was like, okay, yeah, there's still Mike McDonald out there, there's still Anthony Weaver, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, but we really like this guy. We want to give this guy a chance. There's no need to interview those other guys. We feel like we made the right decision. We have our guy. And so I feel like the Commanders may have the same logic, but they don't have their guy yet. They're still waiting to interview Ben Johnson and they're saving him for last. I really feel like that's what's actually going on right now. And also, outside of this whole head coaching search thing, I do really want to make sure I point out the fact that if you look at the 4 teams that were in the conference championships yesterday, what is one of the main things those 4 teams had in common? And I want to just play the Jeopardy music for like 5 seconds to give y'all a chance to go ahead and answer that, but we're going to go ahead and move on. Great to elite tight ends. Now, I'm not saying we need to draft Brock Bowers in the first. I'm not saying that, especially since none of those 4 guys were even drafted in the first round that we just saw yesterday. But I am trying to tell you, and I've been telling y'all for a long time now, that the tight end position is extremely underrated, and y'all gotta stop acting like the tight end position has one of the lowest positional values. We gotta stop that. And even Eugene Shin has gone in depth as to how important a true dual threat tight end is to a team's chances of being a real contender, especially consistently, not just like a flash in the pan 1 year thing, but to be a consistent contender. You need a good tight end, man, a good to great tight end. Now, of course, because none of those elite tight ends were drafted in the first round, I can see the argument about not taking one in the first round like a Brock Bowers. Mark Andrews was the 3rd round. Travis Kelce was the 3rd round as well. George Kittle was the 5th round. And then Sam Laporta, the rookie, was actually drafted the highest out of the 4 in the 2nd round. But all right, play that game if you want to. And luckily for us, if we do play that game and wait to address tight end outside of the first round, we have a Ben Johnson who has shown the ability to scout and develop the right non-first round guy and get him going in Sam Laporta. So I have every faith in the world that if we hire Ben Johnson as our head coach, between him and Eugene Shin, we're going to figure out this tight end position, which has been plaguing us for a long time now. We've had either a really good receiving tight end or a good blocking tight end that couldn't catch for his life. We have not had a true dual threat in a while. Logan Thomas was the closest thing to it, and even he's made his mistakes. He's the type of guy that once he has 10 targets, he's due to fumble. And then also with the injuries and being older than people think, not very explosive. I can't wait to have our guy. Of course, as a Georgia Bulldog fan, I would love nothing more for us to somehow take a quarterback 2nd overall and still find a way to land Brock Bowers somehow, package our 2nd and 3rd round picks and trade back up into the mid first to get them early first or whatever. But I know that's highly unlikely. So you can still go get it like a Jatavion Sanders from Texas, whatever you got to do. But we need to address this tight end position. Or maybe Ben Johnson sees Cole Turner and Armani Rogers and who we already, Curtis Hodges and John Bates already on his roster. And with his development expertise, maybe he could develop one of those guys into being the next Sam Laporta. Maybe we don't even need to draft them. But whether we draft one, sign one in free agency, or we develop a guy that's already here, I want people to stop acting like having a great tight end is not important. That's like one of the very few things that all 4 of those teams yesterday had in common. And to think about it, notice that the best 2 tight ends out of the 4 are the ones that won their championship games and are headed to the Super Bowl. So it looks like this 2023 NFL season and postseason was really the battle of the tight ends. I mean, there was a certain way that you could look at it. Like when there were 8 teams remaining, you could say that all of them had, at the very least, good to great quarterbacks. If you didn't have an elite quarterback, you didn't even have a seat at the table. But I would also argue that tight ends played a big role in it as well. Again, the top 4 made it to the semifinals, and then the best 2 made it to the finals. So we'll basically, whoever ends up winning will be crowned the best tight end in the NFL, and I think that is a strong correlation right there. I'm not going to lie. I also want to point out that this is our GM who played a large role in that 49ers team that's going to the Super Bowl. I feel like that's also very noteworthy that a lot of people may not have thought about. That very 49ers that just came back from down 24-3 with a 7th round quarterback, and granted, Brock Purdy's pretty good, but he's not an MVP candidate. I wouldn't put him in the top 10 quarterbacks, and he's still a 7th round pick. That team that just beat the Detroit Lions that were down, they were down 24-3 and came back and won convincingly like that. That team was built by our very Adam Peters. And I think from Ben Johnson's point of view, after especially just losing to them the way that he did, up 24-3, and then they just kind of, I don't even feel like Ben Johnson got out coached necessarily. I feel like they just got out talented. I feel like their players were just better, and great players just made great plays. playmakers made plays, and I just feel like Ben Johnson has to look at that. Like, even if he didn't already consider the Washington Commanders his favorite choice to be a potential head coach for, I feel like after that, seeing who put that team together in Adam Peters, especially a lot of the elite players, because again, Adam Peters reportedly ran the later rounds of the draft. So like rounds 4 through 7, maybe you can even extend it to rounds 3 through 7 with Fred Warner in the 3rd round, but especially like George Kittle and Talanoa Hufanga and all of those guys like that in the later rounds. Adam Peters gets a lot of credit for that as far as talent evaluation, scouting, and all that type of stuff. So there's no way Ben Johnson didn't just experience what he experienced yesterday and is not looking at Adam Peters like, man, what if I had the talent Kyle Shanahan had? And you can have that if you become our head coach. I know you see the vision, Ben Johnson. Adam Peters, who built that team that just whooped on you and came back from 24-3, that guy is now the GM for the Commanders. Come on, join forces. You're coaching, his talent evaluation. We could build a monster over here. I'm telling you. Also, did y'all see how Jahmyr Gibbs was being used yesterday by Ben Johnson? You even had Breece Hall, a running back for an entirely different team, saying that all running backs dream of being in an offense like that. So now imagine with an Antonio Gibson, even though fumble problem has necessarily reached the potential that we hoped he had, but a guy that's built like literally a middle linebacker and runs a 4.3 something, runs a sub 4.4. Imagine what Ben Johnson can cook up for him. We thought Eric Bieniemy would be able to cook something up. I thought he would be a great fantasy football option. Didn't work out. I think Ben Johnson actually could do that. What Ben Johnson has been getting to Jahmyr Gibbs, he has to look at the Commanders like, hey man, if we re-sign Antonio Gibson for cheap, and right now his market value I believe is like $3.6 million annually according to SpotTrack, re-sign him for very cheap. We have the most cap space in the NFL. Why not? And I could potentially have my Jahmyr Gibbs and Antonio Gibson right now. That's a match made in heaven as well. Also, I want to point out the fact that Bob Myers was there watching that Lions and 49ers game in person. He probably wanted to go ahead and see Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn in person, maybe even shook their hand when we weren't looking. Also, I want to point out the fact that Eminem said that he has a diss track coming if Ben Johnson leaves Detroit to become the Washington Commanders head coach, which I think is just so silly and random. Also, Ron Rivera got another interview for a defensive coordinator job. Now the Rams are interviewing him as their defensive coordinator. And again, if Dan Quinn ends up getting a job as a head coach for, say, the Seahawks, hopefully not us, then Ron Rivera is being considered for the Cowboys defensive coordinator position. But again, like I've already said, I don't think Dan Quinn is leaving for a head coach job. He's going to end up staying with the Cowboys as a defensive coordinator. So it sounds like Ron Rivera may end up going to LA as a defensive coordinator for the Rams. Very interesting, especially with Raheem Morris leaving the defensive coordinator as the Rams to go to become the Falcons head coach. Again, this domino effect of how things, once one thing happens, it affects everybody else. It's going to be a really interesting next few days, man. Also, I saw a report. I don't know if this is true or not, and we already talked about Chase Young in last night's video, but there's a report saying that the 49ers will consider benching defensive end Chase Young for their Super Bowl matchup versus the Chiefs. Young has made a habit of taking several plays off, and the 49ers have started to view him as a liability, and that's absolutely hilarious because I know all of y'all have seen that clip of him not even trying on one of those touchdowns that the Detroit Lions had, and he easily could have stopped it from being a touchdown, and he's just literally not caring. It's like he doesn't even want to play. I don't know what's going on. I don't even feel like he had that problem here. I don't know why he went to the 49ers and got lazier. I don't know what it is, but it's clear and obvious that at first it was kind of up in the air. Maybe we got to steal it. I mean, the day we did it, I was like, man, only a late 3rd round pick. I thought we could have gotten more. I thought we could have gotten a 2nd round pick like we got for Montez Sweat. Then it started to reach a point throughout the rest of the season, the late regular season, that okay, maybe we actually got to steal for a late 3rd for what Chase Young has been doing for the 49ers. He was literally better for us than he has been for them. And then now it's definitive. We got a huge steal in a late 3rd for what Chase Young has been doing for the 49ers. No take backs, these 49ers. I'm sorry. We want to, if there was a chance that we could trade back that late 3rd round pick for Chase Young, I wouldn't do it. But first of all, he's about to be a free agent anyway, so you got to figure out, 49ers got to find out how to pay him after giving up a late 3rd to, maybe that was Adam Peters, maybe chestnut checkers. I'm about to go become the Commanders GM. Let me go ahead and finesse the 49ers out of this late 3rd round pick for my future team and then leave Chase Young on my ex team. Who knows? knows, man? I don't know. I'm just speculating and joking around. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure y'all stay tuned for all of the content. Like I said, I mean, I'm gonna keep reporting everything, any little thing, even if it's a rumor that has anything to do with the Commanders head coaching search, anything. But I'm really excited and can't wait to get to this free agency and especially this draft stuff. So make sure you stay tuned. Mock drafts, all of that type of stuff, film sessions on the way, my big boards like my top 5 quarterbacks and why, my top 5 tight ends and why, all that type of stuff. So stay tuned for all of that type of stuff. I'm super excited to get to that level of content once we get this whole head coaching thing out the way, and then we go ahead and hire our defensive coordinator, go ahead and hire our offensive coordinator, all that type of stuff, and then we can focus purely on player acquisition and talent evaluation, free agency draft, all of that. Make sure y'all stay tuned for all of that content. Again, it's to the point that I need to be making like 2-3 videos a day, but at the very least you're gonna get 1 video a day. So no matter what, when you wake up in the morning, check for a new Street Scores video, because more than likely I've already done another one, and I'm trying to get back to doing 2-3 videos a day because there's so many things to talk about with draft, free agency. I haven't even had a chance to do that stuff in the past few days because it's been solely head coaching search and things like that. So make sure y'all stay tuned. I really appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.